right, everybody. So today, back on the podcast, we have Bryan Boorstein and Aaron Straker. How we doing, guys?
Doing great over here. I don't know if you can hear the background, but my daughter just woke up like moments ago. So
Okay.
she's screaming upstairs. So I'll keep
Okay.
myself on mute as much as I can. But yeah, doing great, man. How about you
Yeah.
guys?
Yeah, I don't hear it, so you're good.
Okay, cool.
And it's what, 6 a.m. over there, Brian?
7. Yeah.
7. Okay. Oh, yeah. Is that mountain time?
Yep.
Okay, cool, cool. So all right, guys. So it's been a while since we had all three of us. I think it might have been a year ago, I think. Aaron, you and I met up, was it last weekend now or two weekends ago?
2 weekends ago.
2 weekends ago, which is cool. So you're probably I don't even know how many people now I've actually gotten to meet, but it's cool. It's cool to actually meet people. And it's one of the nice things about being where I am, East Coast. If you're East or West Coast, there's a decent number of people there. Bryan, you've trained out there with like Cass, you've met Aaron, obviously, some other people. I've never been to any of the fitness seminars that have been held, but and partly part of that is just because of COVID. But at this point, I've met, I don't know, somewhere almost 10 people, and it's cool to see the people in real world and actually connect with them.
Yeah, I know we've had the talk about getting like 8 of us that regularly communicate together at some point.
Mhm.
And how cool would it be to get like Abel from Macedonia
Right.
and like Aaron from wherever he is in the world at that point, and just kind of like all meet up somewhere and train and like have a fun weekend. Be rad.
Yeah, yeah. I think everybody who's out of the US, I mean, within the US would not, I don't even think be that hard to set up, honestly. But we got like Steve Hall in the UK, and like I said, Abel, and a couple other people, maybe Steele Jeffrey from being stuck in China.
Yeah, we really are like all over, man. I mean, maybe the UK is like the most central point.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
I'm down. That would be so much fun. And I mean, I said this to you briefly, Dave, when we were working out, and then I talked to Bryan about it all the time. Like, that's like my favorite part of Instagram, is just like then being, oh, I'm in this town, like who's around? And then like I'm going to Ohio next weekend. And I was like, hey, I'm going to be between Dayton and Cincinnati. Like, who's around? Let's lift weights. Like, and I have people that I'm just going to go meet up with and stuff, which is really cool.
yeah. I'll tell a quick story. Last year I was in New Orleans, and shout out to this guy. I don't know how much he would want me to like publicly put it out there, but I just happened to post a story that I was there, and within a couple of minutes, this guy DM'd me, and turns out that he's this boss chef in New Orleans at this cool restaurant. So he's like, come on by. And it was such a cool experience, man, to just be able to like come on and like, you have a reservation with us, and treated me to this meal. It was the coolest thing. So thank you again to that guy. But it's really cool to be able to connect like that. And I've often thought, I don't know how long I'll do the YouTube thing. Obviously, it takes quite a bit of time, but I think I would always have the Instagram just for the social connections. It's really how we communicate. As much as I initially started for YouTube, and that's where I primarily am as far as content, you really connect with everybody on Instagram.
Yeah. I feel like I've talked to both you guys at some point about how great Instagram has been since all the things that went down in 2020 in the world, and providing a spectrum of like social interaction with people that are like-minded. You just couldn't find that in 2020 at all in any other way. So for me, it was like kind of a saving grace.
Totally. So Aaron, like we said, we got to work out together 2 weeks ago, just did a nice upper workout. And one of the things I think Abel and I will discuss, but also Bryan and whatnot, about, how do people look in real life, right? Because we have like the pictures and everything about how people like actually look. And so I think we could both agree that in real life, I was much, much bigger than you, right? Like
Yes, of course.
So yeah, no, I said to the guys before, I said, I'm almost positive that in like our hoodies and whatnot, we will be generally the same size, but you will definitely be more aesthetic, and like you have muscle in the right places and things. And I think that's exactly what it was, like you have very capped delts, just good insertions, upper body and whatnot. But we were kind of, I think I was surprised, maybe you were too, when we took measurements at the end of the workout, and the arm difference was not that much. I think yours was 17 and a half pumped, mine was 17 and a quarter pumped. But the chest measurement, I was actually about 3/4 of an inch bigger, which I mean, visually, I would not have expected at all, because you definitely you look like you have broad shoulders. But I think that kind of goes to a point I made to you, which is that if you're looking at two people who lift and they're around the same weight, generally in person, it's not going to be these dramatic differences, right? Like if we were to get on stage and we did like a men's physique show, you would clearly win because of how it's distributed and you have a small waist and all that. But as far as just overall size, I know people in the bodybuilding community say weight doesn't matter. It's just about how you look on stage. But in the real world, weight is a pretty good indicator of a general size and appearance, you know?
Yep. Yeah. Especially in this day and age with like Instagram and everything like that, because and I mean, not to go down this rabbit hole, but I think like we're obviously a little bit older and stuff like that in the space. And with the new age of the like Instagram bodybuilder aesthetic, generation, which is, it's really wild because as me being back in the gym or being in the gym, there's these like, 20-year-old kids, maybe 18. And it's like every set they take their shirt off and they're like flexing and stuff in the mirror. And I'm like, dude, you're in your like first 6 months of lifting.
Yeah.
You look like a regular ass 17-year-old, you know what I mean? But then a lot of the people that they like look up to and with the social media followings and stuff, they look great, and then you realize that they're like 165 pounds or something like that. And you're like, oh, like so much of it really is not necessarily smoke and mirrors, but like knowing how to play the game and angles and stuff like that. And then it can, everyone appears massive.
Yep.
And then you see people in real life and you're like, oh, you are 165 pounds sort of thing.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, I've been really surprised as I've gained weight since my diet ended 4 months ago or whatever, that I watch videos and pictures of myself and I feel like I look smaller. It's like I'm 197 pounds now instead of 182, but because you're missing all the definition and stuff, like my arm is actually, 3/4 of an inch or an inch bigger now. And in videos and pictures, I look smaller and it's kind of fucking with me a little bit, but it's just one of those illusions,
Bryan, what happened to staying at the 192 range?
Yeah, just wasn't happening, man. So I know I've talked to both of you guys about this, but I was so surprised for the longest time after the diet that no matter what I did, it felt like I couldn't break out of the high 180s. It was like, no matter what, I can eat anything I want. And I'm just in the 180s all the time. And then suddenly it was like in a matter of 2 weeks, it was like 194, 195. And I'm like, oh, that happened quickly, So now I'm at a point where I need to almost like consider a mini cut or just kind of live in like the mid 190s until the next time I diet.
Do you guys have a point? Like for me, it's right around 195, where if I'm coming down from 205, I start to notice, oh, okay, this was super easy, this first 10 pounds, and now it's actually noticeable effort. But also on the way up, I'm also right now I'm around 195. And not that I couldn't gain weight, I could easily consciously gain weight. But if I just eat, quote unquote, what I want of reasonable foods, it's like, oh, it just kind of ends up being back at that level. I'm maintaining on about 3,000. I could easily eat a higher average calorie amount than that. But it's a clear level for me that this is a very comfortable spot for me. So I don't know where you guys have that weight.
Yeah, I feel like very similarly to you with the numbers. I think the challenge for me on the way down starts when I get to like 188, 187, like start kind of moving from the high 180s to the mid 180s. It starts to really present a challenge, but I can pretty much hang out in the 190, 192 range with just some conscious effort. So, not crushing a pan of brownies 3 times a week or eating cheesesteaks and fries as a meal, like just basically not having like 2,000 calorie meals. And if I do that, like the low 190s is fine. If you see me like I am now creeping up like above 195, it's pretty much going to be a lot of foods that are palatable and calorically dense, and probably not as nutritious. So it's really just, it's not even like a matter of an inability to control myself. It's just kind of like, hey, it's there. I have no goals right now, so I'm just going to eat this. And then before you know it, it's like, okay, now it's time to like get things back in order and get down another couple pounds where I can hang out comfortably and be healthy.
Right. How about you, Aaron?
I mean, for me, I hate to say this because it sounds like kind of stupid, but like dieting for me is always really easy. It just works every time I diet, every time I go through a new diet, I'm able to diet on higher calories than all of my other diets, and I get down to the same, body weight sort of thing. So that one's always just, I'm just very adherent and it works sort of thing. Then on the other side, when I am not like when I was in Pennsylvania, right, for like those 8 days, I wasn't really tracking my food because I know it's just hard to get enough in. I will settle in around the like 191, 192, 193 range. So I actually like lost like 4 pounds when I went up to PA. And now I'm back in like the 194, 195, 196 right now, but that's like an effort for me. I have to eat, every few hours. My hunger and satiety signaling, I would say, has become pretty like mispatterned through so many years of tracking my food and stuff, because I just like, the only time I'm going to get like truly hungry is if I'm like fasting. For example, yesterday morning I went and got labs done. My appointment was at like 10:15, so I stopped eating the night before around like 9. So I had a 13-hour plus fast. I was fucking starving, by the time I went there. But aside from things like that, if I'm just like caught up in work and not paying attention, like hours will go by and I'm like, holy fuck, it's 2 p.m. I've only had breakfast sort of thing. Like now I'm behind on the day and it's going to be super hard for me to get all my food in. So it is, unless I'm paying attention to it, my weight will settle in around that like 192-ish thing.
Okay. So yeah, all pretty similar there then. Do you, Aaron, because you're pretty lean still, do you try to get up over 200 at all, or are you mostly just hovering 190s?
So last year I had I just botched and like half-assed a gaining phase. I don't know, because I only have like a small, I basically, 6 weeks essentially until we head back to Bali. And I know at my, training age and stuff, if I want to get to 200 pounds, that's essentially another 5 to 6 pounds in 6 weeks. That's not good weight.
Sure.
And once it's hard gaining there because it's going to be so hot, and I'm not quite sure what I want to do. I'll probably sit in like the high 190s for a bit, but it's been probably like a year and a half, maybe a little bit more, since I've been over 200 pounds.
Gotcha.
Yeah, he definitely has a natural tendency to just remain leaner. Like he was saying, he has to work to get above 195, whereas I have to work to stay below 195. So yeah, different people,
Yeah. And then just wrapping up the topic you kind of discussed on like the overall size of people lifting. I'm not trying to say it's not an appropriate goal if you want to be lean. And I actually think again, it's going to be different for everybody, but I think if you're in high school or even college, that is a look. Let's just say you're 5'10", like a very lean 165, 170, 175. Like that is the college Chad, right? Like that is, usually highly desirable in that age group. It just seems that when you get to your late 20s and 30s and whatnot, I guess there's just more of an appreciation for size and strength. I think a lot of people, as you get older, you're more okay with a little bit higher body fat, but looking, I don't know if you want to call it manlier or whatever you want to call it, it just seems to be a change with age. But I think if you're younger and listening to this, like I'm not trying to hate on that goal. I think it's fine. But just know that in clothes, generally, it's harder to look like you lift.
Mm-hmm. I still don't think that you would have women like when you're in your 30s. It's not like women are going to be like, man, that guy at 200 is much more desirable than the same guy at 180 or something like that. Like, I think just like it really has no impact as you get older. It's so much more about like what's going on up here and other factors.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely. So I think it's sometimes I forget, Brian, like how much we say on DMs versus what we talked about like on podcasts and whatnot. But obviously a big topic now, and I had Milo Wolf on, was these lengthened sets, right? I know you've talked a lot about it. I have been incorporating it more for my back work recently, and it's amazing how much my back has blown up. Just kidding. Now, obviously, I wouldn't notice it in that in that time frame. But no, I was telling Aaron how I'm doing those low rows I've shown you videos of, and consistently it feels like, because I'm used to such a big range of motion there, that I feel like I'm doing so little, but I'm still bringing my arm pretty much right in line with my body. And I've gone a lot heavier, and it does feel good. And whether or not it's doing anything, I think if it's something that feels good and adds variety, why not try it? But what is your experience with it so far? Because you've been experimenting with it a little longer.
Yeah, I've been doing it for quite a long time now. I want to say a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years in some capacity, because we had Helms on my podcast like 15 months ago, and we were grilling him on some of the lengthened stuff. And he used, at the time, he was kind of indifferent or non-committal, and he used the RIR non-failure research to basically be like, yeah, I don't think it matters, because look, you can get gains at 5, 6, 7 RIR. So does it matter if the lengthened portion of your cable row is closer to failure than it usually would be if you were just taking the short position to failure? Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah.
So I've kind of taken it to an extreme. I like to kind of push the envelope when I get excited about something, and it's easy to be a bit nihilistic as well and be like, I'm 25 years in, like, is anything really going to matter at all? So the way I kind of look at it is like, hey, worst case scenario, I'm not going to make gains, but I'm not going to like move backwards by doing this. So I've taken the experiments pretty far at this point, and I generally will progress into these lengthened only sets over the course of a mesocycle. So like right now I'm in week 4 or 5 of my block. And so almost every short overload movement I do has one full range of motion set and then like a normal rest period. And then I'll throw 30% more weight on than whatever I used for the full range of motion set. And I will do that set to a similar number of reps that I got on the first set. So if I got like 8 to 12, call it cable rows, 8 to 12 cable rows, full range of motion, I'll throw 30% more on. That usually takes me from something like 180 to 240 or something like that. And then I'll use 240 and do 8 to 12 reps, where I might get 1 or 2 like full reps, and then that range of motion will gradually fall off from there. And I've just truly been enjoying it. Like I love the way that training that way keeps you from compensating to get short, because that's what always happens to us as we're training any of these like super short overloaded movements, is there's like these mini compensations that occur because it's at the lateral raise and you want to get the arm all the way up. There's a teeny bit of torso movement, or your cable raise, or your cable row, you're moving your torso a little bit more. You're kind of doing one of those like head forward things that people do to get short at the end. And if you just kind of accept that it's okay that you're not getting full range of motion, then you can stay much more in the target muscle as you're going through these kind of like micro reps or partial reps or whatever you want to call them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really right now, like every short movement I do is at that point of the progression. So it's been kind of cool to just do this different approach to training, and it's unique. And I think that it's just cool to be able to talk about it with people and experience it and kind of discuss something that isn't super common.
Are you doing it at all, Aaron?
Yeah, so I have my when I came back to the States, obviously I changed gym, so I wrote a brand new training program for that, and I'm following Bryan's like proposed progression model that you put up an Instagram post a few weeks back, Bryan, for any of the listeners to go take a look at. It's quite clever. I was, I'm often impressed with Bryan, but this is one of the ones where I was like reading through it. I'm like, this is really, really good. So I am using that. The one thing that's a little bit different is I like to run my training programs like longer than a lot of people traditionally. Like personally, I'm not running a training program for less than 8 weeks, but 12 to 14, 15 is probably like more common for me. So I modified a few things based on how I know myself until adding in the lengthened partials and stuff, but I'm super excited about it.
Yeah. I guess actually discussing your programming, Bryan, we talked about experiments a little bit, and I also want to discuss the idea of just kind of doing what we want in the gym. But first, maybe discuss the experiment that I've played a part in convincing you to try with the arm training.
Yeah. Your unilateral calf experiment that I know you've talked about in depth on your podcast and others. Very interesting that you go 2 years and see no difference by training one calf and the other. And then in my situation, 25 years into training, I literally don't think there's been a single day of my 25 years that I haven't been unimpressed with my left arm compared to my right. And this is literally from like 15-year-old Bryan, like starting to work out and like flexing in the mirror and being like, man, my left arm sucks. What's up with that? So for the next 6 months, I basically committed to any direct isolation work for arms to just be with my left arm, and still doing all like the chest, shoulder, and back work, using both arms. But I have at this point, my microcycles are 9 days long, so it does get a little confusing when you're counting weekly volume. But I have now 11 sets for my left arm of biceps in my 9-day period. And I have, I think, 10 or 9 sets of triceps for my left arm. And so if anything is going to work, I feel like this at least gives it a shot to see if the left arm can catch up. When I started, I put the post on Instagram, but my right arm was 17 inches and my left arm was 16.75, which isn't like a huge difference. I actually thought it was going to be bigger than that. And then I also have DEXA data from August. So this would be like a month before I started the experiment. And it had my right arm at 12.2 pounds of muscle and my left arm at 11.8 pounds of muscle. So you're looking at almost half a pound difference. And then both arms had 1.7 pounds of fat on them. So that is interesting as well. But there's certainly a size discrepancy. And I've done 4 sessions so far, 2 bicep days and two triceps. And so I'm like, not even 2 weeks into the experiment so far.
Yeah, predictions.
Yeah, I really don't think anything's gonna happen, to be honest. I know like Aaron and I went through years and years of CrossFit where we didn't train arms at all. And I don't think I lost anything on either arm during that period of time. I also am not really sure that I gained much since that time. So I would personally be kind of surprised if A, my right arm loses anything from not training it, and B, if my left arm gains anything significant from training it. I just don't exactly expect much to happen.
Yeah. What about you, Aaron? Any thoughts?
I mean, my prediction is from a measurement standpoint with like a tape measure, probably not, but I do think the DEXA numbers will be different. I mean, to anything, I don't know where exactly from an objective standpoint the word significant becomes like scientifically applicable, but like, let's say I think the right arm is the bigger arm, right, Bryan?
Yeah.
Let's say I think that will at least drop by like 1/10 of a pound, and I would at least expect the left arm to increase by 1/10 of a pound. But
are you
more
going to get
than
another
that,
DEXA at the 6-month mark?
Yeah, I bought 2 of them. So so I'm trying to decide when I want to use the second DEXA, right? Because I did the last one 2 months after my diet. So there's like a part of me that kind of wanted to save it to do it at the end of my next diet to see like what my body fat and muscle mass comparisons are at the end of a diet versus 2 months eating up. But I could always just buy another one. Like I could do one after the arm experiment and then another one at the end of the diet or something along those lines. And that may actually work out perfectly timing wise. If I were to go 6 months from now and do one at the end of the arm training, that would probably also coincide with the beginning of my diet. So I'd have like a pre-diet DEXA and then a post-diet DEXA. And so that would also give some cool insights.
Yeah.
How much are they where you are?
I bought a pack of 2 for $408.
Okay. Yeah. I got one at USC 2018, 19. I don't even remember how much. It was maybe like 150. I'm sure there's somewhere around me I could get one, but it's obviously a little bit of a pain to go and whatever. But I think it's a cool data point, especially if you're using the same machine, right? Just to be able to see there. I know Abel has said that and I don't necessarily agree with him, but he's like, I just feel like my arms wouldn't grow. Like even if I took something or he did double the volume, he just wouldn't grow. I thought, how could they not grow? If you're gaining weight and you're gaining strength, they're going to grow. However, that is how I feel about with the calves. I mean, I measured them yesterday because you and I were talking about morning versus nighttime discrepancy. So anybody listening, if you want to add some data points, take your calf measurements in the morning, relaxed, and then at night, relaxed, and post below if there's any difference, or you can DM me. But mine are literally to the 16th of an inch identical. And I'm even surprised by that as somebody who talks about calves are very genetically influenced and stubborn. Like I'll do 6 to 8 sets per week, and I will do an intense stretch afterwards. Like I've done so many variations, and it really does surprise me that after so long, you wouldn't see any difference, you know? So it is interesting to see, especially after this much time. And then I know we've discussed a little bit with Jeff Alberts where it's like, well, maybe the fact that I do running, like I do like cardio, but really, if that's enough to maintain it and have maximum muscle in this group, then what are we doing here? You know, if because I don't do lots of cardio. I do intervals twice a week, 6 intervals of 30 seconds twice a week on a bike or elliptical, occasionally running, but it's not calf work. I mean, if that's enough to maintain it, like I said, then what are we even doing? So it's just interesting.
Maybe the arm experiment will shed some light on that too. Cause I mean, if I can go 6 months and like no change in the arms, then maybe there just really is this point in your training journey where we can harness the maintenance volume research and just be like, yeah, like you really don't need much to maintain when you're this deep into your journey.
Yeah, and the self-experimentation has made me learn a lot because at the end of the day, the studies are great, but you know, we've talked many times about how there's flaws in studies and whatnot. But I have done just left arm experiments numerous times, or I shouldn't say just, I've never stopped training my right arm like you're doing. So that is interesting. But I've added left arm volume plenty of times. I mean, as much as just a couple sets a week to full left arm specialization phases. Have not seen a difference there. It's always about a half an inch difference between right and left arm. Even the shape is different. The insertion and everything is a little bit different. But which just makes me think, okay, so if volume is this primary driver of hypertrophy, and I understand there's a lot in that statement, right? I understand that it's oftentimes misconstrued, but still, I've never noticed a difference from doing all that extra volume. And if anything, I would think maybe there's more validity to Dante Trudell talks about getting weird with it with exercise selection. And I don't know about how like unique you have to use with different exercises, but I could see maybe how if you're trying a variation you haven't tried before, maybe you're more likely to eke something out. So for example, if you're already doing 10 sets for biceps and they've been stalled and whatnot, I would put more faith in a new variation, especially for a more complex, maybe like a chest or back, especially a new variation rather than just increasing volume by 20% or 30% personally, just from what I've seen in my own experimentation.
Yeah, I think that's probably reasonable. It's so difficult because then you start getting into the challenge of whether progress is just neurological or whether you're like actually making progress. And so, yeah, I mean, like you and I have talked about, man, if you put a new movement in, it could be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, depending on how complex it is. And you're still making these like little micro progressions just because your body's getting more familiar with the movement pattern. And like, at what point is the movement in long enough that you can say, hey, I added a rep or 5 pounds, and that's like actually going to correlate to muscle gain.
For sure. Yeah. And just to elaborate, then I want to hear your thoughts, Aaron. But just as an example, maybe you've always done a lying leg curl, right? But we show that, I mean, a few studies on it show that a seated leg curl, there's more of a stretch there. And so it seems to be superior. So if you were always doing lying leg curl and then you were up 10 sets, 12 sets, okay, I'm not really going anywhere, but you switch to that different exercise, I can see that being beneficial. Or even the other way around, because at least one, if not a couple of studies show that lying leg curl puts more emphasis on the sartorius muscle. Yep. And so maybe you get a little bit more growth by hitting a muscle with a greater emphasis within like a larger muscle group, I guess is a better way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that, to take the conversation back a little bit, I think the interesting wrinkle in your calf experiment, Dave, is the calves are an interesting muscle in that we use them so much every single day. So I think this is purely conjecture, right? I 100% could be 100% wrong. I think the difference with Bryan's like arm experiment is like your arms aren't getting nearly as much like volume of life volume really as your calves. So potentially, I mean, if I had to place my money, I would say I think Bryan will see something small. And I know from like personal experience, the only time I ever saw, like, again, I didn't measure or whatever, but it was clearly visible to me, like calf progress, I was training them 5 sets, 5 days per week. And I started every single session with calves, and I did see progress. But then when I did that for like 4 months, when I stopped doing them at that volume, they went right back to how they were before. So I think that's one of those things where, and who knows, maybe it wasn't like actual, new muscle tissue, but it like, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy or just extra fluid in there or whatever. But I think it is one of those interesting cases with that. One thing I really like that you did say, Dave, and I know Bryan and I have talked, offline a little bit more about this with some of the research. I question some of the applicability to people like us who have been lifting for, 2 decades sort of thing. I just don't know how much of it actually, necessarily applies to a magnitude of effect that we may notice like a subjective perceivable difference in.
Yeah. I mean, Alberto, I haven't posted it yet, but Alberto and I were talking about how I think he said he's doing not more than 8 sets per body part for most muscle groups. And it's just like, show me these advanced bodybuilders who are just going up and up and up in volume over the years. I just don't really see it. If anything, they go down in volume, right, over time. So not that it doesn't exist, but, and I get it, like the data shows what the data shows, but man, I really would also question, like you said, Aaron, how much that applies to advanced lifters. And even if you could do it for a brief period of time, like I wouldn't be surprised if there was a study showing 2 people who had lifted for, let's say a bigger data set, and they had been lifting for 10 years, and a higher volume phase maybe showed more muscle growth in a DEXA, but somehow that's just not what it ends up doing. Maybe it's a recover issue, but long term, I just don't see that. And just your comment about the CAD thing with the 5 days a week, given the data we have and also just our experience on how much easier it is to maintain muscle, I would have to wonder if that really was true muscle growth in that period. It seems unlikely that you would just lose it so quickly afterwards, unless it just was this kind of temporary, like you said, maybe there was like a perma pump going on, fluid retention, things like that.
Yeah.
Regarding the research and applicability to us, I heard Helms on a podcast at one point in the last few months say something like, yeah, if you're an advanced person, you're not really listening to this podcast. Like these types of things are mostly for like your earlier mid-intermediate type trainee. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I think the statement of if you're advanced, you're not listening to this podcast is wrong, because people listen to podcasts for like 100 different reasons. I mean, one of the main reasons, there are 2 main reasons I listen to them. And some of it's to just keep up with the current state of the figures in our industry and like what their mindsets are on things and stuff like that. And second, it's straight up entertainment. Like I kind of enjoy hearing Steve Hall interview Eric Helms about stretch mediated hypertrophy, like whether that's applicable to me or it's more applicable to an intermediate, and the way that he talks about it might not specifically apply to me. It's just cool to be able to hear those 2 guys that I follow talk about a topic that I'm interested in. So it was an interesting statement from him, because it kind of made me sit back and think like, yeah, I guess when he's talking to people on these podcasts, he's almost ubiquitously talking to people with 15 years less experience than me or 20 years less experience than me. And so maybe like the way that I'm doing things is just the way that I should be doing things, because this is what I've figured out for myself over the years. And it aligns a little bit with the research here and there, but maybe it doesn't have to align perfectly with the research because I'm an N of 1.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. As far as consuming the content, that's very interesting that he said that. I wonder if he meant that specific podcast or in general. I would say probably a lot of advanced lifters just end up doing their own thing, right? They don't end up listening to as much. But I know Jeff Albert says he's listened to this podcast. I listen to other podcasts, but it is very vetted. I mean, there's really only a couple of podcasts on fitness that I will listen to. And in part, it's because when you get to an advanced stage of knowledge in any topic, you can spend 90% of your time, if not more, seeing the same things over and over, right? So I don't know how many finance books I've read over the years, but I really probably only glean 1 or 2 key points per book at this point, because obviously if it's a good finance book, they're going to discuss a lot of the basics that a lot of people don't know. So it's like, oh, here's this one thing I maybe haven't heard before. And with fitness, Like I listen to Mass Research Review every single month, but 95% of it is stuff I've heard before. It's just not that different. But that's anything you become expert in, that's just how it is, right? I mean, if you're expecting to double your knowledge every time, obviously that's going to stop pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I have even kind of taken that approach to like research studies too. So like the only thing that I'm really giving my time to now are like systematic reviews and metas and stuff. I think we're in this interesting space in the industry where it's like I mean, it's hard because obviously in my little niche of the world, I'm so, food and nutrition and fitness focused and stuff, but like so many coaches are posting like this new study came out showing like X, Y, and Z. And I'm just like, show me a meta that validates that across multiple populations over, different research sets and stuff. I'm not paying attention to it because I feel like so infrequently does it actually, change what we're doing or be a needle mover or whatever. A lot of times it ends up just being noise or a small sample set or something like that that just doesn't really translate well to, practicality.
Yeah, which makes it tough in terms of a lot of people talk about how like conveying health information and fitness information. How do you stay exciting? And the reality is, and what you don't, right? Like if you're really being totally objective, like a lot of times, like we're talking about this stretch mediated hypertrophy, and that's cool, right? But it like the big influencers and things like that, the entire game is making something that's really not that new sound new and exciting and whatnot. That's just how it is, right? So I can appreciate, I think Lane Norton, I know a lot of people have problems with Lane, but I can appreciate he has a blend of, I don't want to say drama, but he keeps it interesting while still providing like saying we need evidence on this and we need the data and this is what the current data supports. And I can appreciate that versus like you said, Aaron, just like, hey, here's this new study. It's crazy. And, everybody's going crazy over this study. And it's just, the reality is if you are into the scientific method and like what is legitimate, it's boring if you are somebody, it's not boring to me, but it's boring if you're somebody who's looking for hype and like this new crazy thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the thing that I personally, this is, a personal standpoint here about the stretch mediated hypertrophy stuff is, something that we know, right? And it's been said many times before is like the hobbyists, like your pure passion bodybuilders and stuff, like they're ahead of science. Well, some of them are ahead of science. There's also a lot of bullshit, right? Or things that I shouldn't say bullshit, but things that haven't really panned out in the science. But then there's also things that 20 years later, we find out that like so-and-so is right, in the 80s, or I mean, fucking hell, 20 years ago was the 2000s, early 2000s now.
Yeah.
But I think it helps for me at this point, like I'd say I'm like gleaming hope out of it, like something new will change and excite me. So even though there's like, out of 10 hopes, like 9 are letdowns, like I just sit on the edge for like maybe this one is it, And I think the stretch mediated hypertrophy thing or spending much more, volume to lengthen type stuff, that is one of those like 1 in 10 for me. And then kind of to tie it back together, in the 80s and the 90s, when people would say like the squat is the king and all these things, it's like, oh, the reason is because it's, overloaded in the lengthened. And now we're just kind of learning that more concretely as a, population of lifters, 30, 40 years later. But that one has been one that I have been like excited about. And then I am changing a lot of things. So when, like, for instance, like I'm doing, a very low volume program historically for me. I only have like my one chest day only has 5 sets, or sorry, yeah, 5. And I'm smoked by the end of it. And I'm like, I literally just trained chest for like 13 total minutes. And it's like, I have a massive pump in it. I'm smoked, but I'm like executing those 5 sets with everything I have, as opposed to like 4 RIR sets, 5 RIR sets, which is what so many people train. Like I've definitely shifted from that high. I was that high volume person because it always worked for me. Even like 3 years ago, I was like, it's always worked. Like, why am I going to change it? But Bryan is one who really helped me just transition. And now I'm like, oh, wow. Like I was really, not, I guess maybe not wrong, but stubborn to not change my ways, where now I'm like, why would I do 12 sets when I can get that in 5? And if the odds are that I'm not really growing that much anyway, it really becomes like an opportunity cost on your time sort of thing to talk about or think about from an approach.
I think there's an also longevity concern if we want to do this into our like 50s, 60s, 70s, that every bit of volume that you do is having an effect on your joints and your system and all this stuff. And so if we can eke out results narrowly small in some capacity doing 5 sets versus maybe it's a teeny bit faster, or it's not at all with 12 sets, like, yeah, the opportunity cost may not be in your favor.
Yeah. So when you and I lifted, Aaron, we did 18 total sets, but really it's only 3 per body part. Typically, we didn't do chest that day because I'm trying to heal up a little bit. But typically it would be like, for me, 3 chest, 3 back with a vertical pull, 3 shoulder, 3 back with a horizontal pull. So technically 6 for back, and then 3 biceps, 3 triceps. And that, but you're just talking 18 work sets. And I think we were both pushing to, a 0 to 2 RAR depending on the set. Which, as a side note, I was telling Bryan and Abel how, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you and I used the exact same weight and almost the exact same reps on every set to a similar RAR, right?
Yeah.
Our strength was
awesome.
like eerily similar. I mean, it was almost identical.
I do think though that there's, I don't want to use like ego in a negative sense, but like almost like a camaraderie, companionship sort of thing. Because I guarantee if I went into that gym that same day and was using those same machines, I would have loaded things differently, and this actually happened to me at the gym like Tuesday or whatever. I misloaded I was doing unilateral prone lying hamstring curls. I misloaded it and still hit the same amount of reps. And I was like, that's literally insane. So it comes to like how much of it is like psychological. Like, oh, well, last week I did 40 for 7. Okay. And this week I'm going to do 40 and try and get like 8 or 9. I misloaded it to 50 and I still did 7. And that is like a really wild, like psychological kind of phenomenon.
Yeah, I definitely think that exists. I have a buddy I live with, occasionally. I think I mentioned to you, my friend Kevin, and we were lifting together. It's not identical strength, but I like lifting with other people because there is that kind of camaraderie to it. And okay, we're pushing ourselves. Exactly. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure to some degree it influences strength. I would say for me, at least, that workout was pretty in line with the numbers I would normally do. But Bryan, you and I have talked about this too. I think you might be a little stronger, especially depending on the movement. But on the whole, we're also extremely similar in strength.
Yeah, I don't think we're much different at all. I mean, like, I don't do barbell basics anymore. So when you and I talk about like our barbell movements, we're talking like years and years ago at this point. But yeah, our numbers were almost the same there. Aaron and I have been really close as well. I think he's a slightly better deadlifter than me and definitely a better bencher. But like, again, we're talking like barbell basics. It's so ambiguous when you throw like cable movements and these more like specific kind of isolated compounds, if you want to call them that.
Well, that's why I think it's even more, because really, if you get into free weights, there's more of that neurological component. Okay, maybe this person's been deadlifting for the last few years and this person hasn't. So that's huge. The more you get into you said, isolated compound or machine, the more it really is how much force can that contractile tissue generate, right? So I was almost even more surprised that it was, I mean, I think we literally did the same reps on every single set. So it's just kind of interesting there. We were talking though about your oddly strong lateral raises though, Bryan, because he and I were using the same weight, but don't you do like 35-pound strict laterals or something?
Yeah, I mean, when I used to do dumbbell laterals, I don't really do them anymore. But yeah, I was using 35 strict for sets of 12 to 15. I don't. It's just there's so much that variability in execution, I guess. Sure. Like we've talked about how even 1% of like hip movement that you may not even be able to see in a video, like it can still look strict, but there's like a little something going on there, and that can make a difference. It makes a huge difference whether there's like a slight bend in the elbow or not, or like if the arm stays completely straight and you increase the length of that moment arm. So I mean, there's so many variables in there. It's really hard to say. I almost think it's more accurate to compare like two people doing a cable lateral raise on the same machine with the same setup,
Right.
because dumbbells just have that inherent compensation to get short. Like I was talking about earlier, there's just too many ways that we can compensate to get the last few inches.
Yeah, I mean, especially given that our dumbbell shoulder presses and whatnot were so similar, if not identical, that would make more sense as a reason. I actually just recently, and this will tie in well with the next topic of just kind of doing what we want. But I was doing dumbbell shoulder press on my home workout, and I was like, I just do not feel like doing this anymore. So I switched to laterals, but I haven't done dumbbell laterals in a very long time. And I was doing them, and I was doing maybe 20. I was doing a rest pause, so I was doing 25 pounds for 15, rest pause into whatever. And so I said, okay, I'm going to just do a seated, completely strict lateral. And I was doing like 15 pounds for 12 or something. I mean, but like literally zero momentum, just a straight arm. And that's why it's so tough to gauge progression. So it's like, okay, so you're going to lift for at this point now 18 years, and you're still doing 15 pounds, or you can make it hard enough to do 15 pounds for laterals. I guarantee you my 16-year-old self could have picked up 15-pound dumbbells and done lateral raises, right? Like he could have done it. So how do you gauge that progression? Which is why I go back to, like, I know, rest in peace, Doug Brignola. I just found that out yesterday. That was very surprising to hear. Yeah. But when he would talk about these movements and, oh, you could just isolate everything. It's like maybe, but it makes progression so difficult to gauge. Like I'm still, after having over 400-pound squat, I can make a body weight sissy squat difficult. So how do I gauge that anything's happening there, or am I just changing form? It's just more difficult, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's do you ever listen to Dave Tate's Table Talk podcast? It's actually
heard him once or twice.
I really enjoy it. It's like 2.5, 3 hour episodes with relatively prominent figures in the industry talking about everything, that can come to mind. So he did like one with John Meadows that was amazing before he died. And a couple others I listened to, but the one I'm referencing right now is with Greg Nuckols. And one of the questions he asked Greg Nuckols is like, hey, if I'm doing curls, is it better for me to do like 6 to 8 really controlled slow reps with like a 30 or 35-pound dumbbell, and I'm still reaching failure on that like 6 to 8 rep range? Or is it better for me to lift like 50-pound dumbbells or 60-pound dumbbells and, use a little momentum and, still reach failure in the 6 to 8 rep range? And they kind of went back and forth on this for like 10 minutes. And at the end, Greg Nuckols is just like, I don't think it matters. He's like, as long as you're like, getting close to failure, like your biceps are the limiter and like the slow contraction speed is going to occur. So like, yeah, it doesn't matter type thing. But you're talking about like 35 pounds for 60 pounds or 30 versus 50 or whatever. And like, it's crazy to look at that and be like, you could just manufacture like a slower contraction speed and like still get as an effective of a stimulus, which kind of tells you, hey, you can make 15-pound lateral raises super hard. Is it better to do that or use 30-pound lateral raises and use a little bit of momentum? And who knows?
Yeah, especially as we get older. I think for sport performance, it would matter, and I'd go for the heavier weight and be more explosive, within reason. But that's why, I think my best was 10 or 12 reps with a 100-pound dumbbell shoulder press. And I think about that, I'm like, dude, I haven't done a 100-pound dumbbell shoulder press in a long time, but it's not like my shoulders are smaller there. And that, so many people have heard me talk about progressive overload and getting stronger. It's like, yes, absolutely. But that's assuming the same form. And if you can do it with a lot less and decrease the risk of injury, I mean, I don't do heavy deadlifts anymore. I don't do super heavy squats anymore, like barbell squats. If you can do it with a much lower risk of injury, why not use the lower weight other than for ego?
Yeah. No, I agree completely. I mean, I've dropped the weights, as you and I've talked about, on almost everything I do now. So it's hard to even be like, to even say I'm stronger than I was, because there's just no comparison at all. And I feel like I have more muscle in certain areas, and that can occur even in the absence of these heavy explosive weights.
something that people don't often talk about, that I know happens now at, because Brian and I have talked about this, the fatigue costs of those really heavy sets where you're pushing yourself, and how that impacts your CNS, and whether you can even train the rest of your training day because you're smoked from that one set to all out, max effort on deadlift. Like, good luck training the next like 6 exercises in your session after that sort of thing. Like, when you were younger and smaller and weren't as strong, that max effort, set wasn't as centrally fatiguing because you weren't as strong.
Yeah. Like Dave, you and I both have stories of barbell curling 135 plus pounds and, not being super clean and whatever, but like, hey, you threw the big wheels on there and you did some curls, and like, we would never do that now. Like we maybe could, but like 95-pound barbell curl is plenty heavy and gives me plenty of stimulus, with to Aaron's point, like a significantly less fatigue cost.
Yeah, I sometimes I forget about that, but my first year of dental school, so I was only 22, 23. My arms definitely measured smaller. I think they were right around 16 at the time. And at the very end of my workout, so after like pull-ups and rows and everything, I was doing multiple sets of 8 with 135. And I'm like, some of these weights I use, I was like, how's it even doing that? Like, I don't even know if I could do that now because I'm just so not used to it,
Yeah. Yeah.
But keep in mind, when I do my regular curls now, and this seems lighter than some people go, but I mean, I'm curling 35 to 45-pound dumbbells, it's just not crazy. I used to do 65-pound dumbbells for, some, I mean, not like horrible form, but definitely loose form. Again, at the end of the workout, I'm like, I don't know. I just don't have the desire to do it anymore. I don't have any ego with my dumbbell curls. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I do think there's value in getting really strong on the basic movements during your first few years of lifting. Not saying use crap form, but I do think there's value in getting strong and learning the techniques and all that early on.
Yeah, I agree. I'm actually training I just took on a new client, which I don't do too often, but a 16-year-old kid from Sweden. And I don't exactly know how he found me, but he's got 6 months training experience, and the kid moves so diligently and with so much purpose. And it's like, I look at him at 16 and I'm like, I would never have had the ability to implement this the way that you're doing it. And it's like actually really impressive to see. I'm able to, like, I look at him and I see myself in a lot of his movement, which is just kind of nuts to say to somebody that has like less than a year of experience. But the education system, I think at this point, is so far above where it was when we first started.
Yeah, right. So let's dive in a little bit to the topic of kind of just doing what you want, because Bryan, you and I have talked about this recently, and I know you've mentioned that you have some hangups about it because obviously you have a whole company there and people are seeing what you're doing and whatnot. And I've always had a hang up because I just don't like to accept, I don't know if you want to call it accepting defeat, like accepting the idea of just like giving up on something and saying, like with the calves thing, even somebody, you could easily make a logical argument. Well, why don't you just stop training entirely? It's like, well, I'd rather at least try and see if anything pops up, whatever. And similarly, for me to not have a structured routine is very difficult for me, just in general. And so recently I've talked before about how I've just kind of hit a mental wall on, okay, it's been so long. And I was doing DC training, but it was because I convinced myself maybe there's a little something that's going to happen. And then I did the training with Revive Stronger, and it was like, I'm totally open to the idea and maybe something could happen. If I thought 0.0% chance of something happening, I wouldn't have done it. So I got really excited for it again. And it was just really cool to be excited. And I'm kind of at this point, well, can I expect anything? And I think I forget if it was the last Q&A maybe I had with Abel where I talked about this, where somebody could hear me and think, oh, well, you don't like training anymore. And it's like, well, don't mistake it. When I go on vacations, like I went on my the cruise a couple months ago, me and my friend worked out every single morning. We got up at 6 a.m. and worked out. That's how we started our vacation. Whenever I go somewhere, most of the time I say, can we like get a lift in somewhere? So I enjoy it. It's just something about going in and knowing that you're just going to hit the same numbers, whatnot. So we've kind of discussed, well, what if you just went in and did what you want? And to be clear, this is not something I would tell somebody who's trying to maximize progress to do. This is a unique situation to me and maybe Bryan. So I was like, okay, well, I do 2 upper and 1 to 2 lower per week. So on my home workout, the last 2 weeks, I've just gone in and literally just did what I wanted. And the workouts were actually longer, but I wasn't making myself rest pause here. I was just choosing exercises I wanted to do. I'm only 2 weeks in, so I have no idea. And I'm also only doing this for 1 of my 3 to 4 workouts per week. So I would expect that, like the last few years, nothing's going to happen, in which case that's great. If it doesn't get worse, and now I'm enjoying this workout when I come home from work and I'm drained and whatever, rather than dreading it all day, wonderful. And I think, Bryan, you've even considered doing that just entirely, right? Like maybe doing a bro split or just doing something that you enjoyed.
Yeah, no, totally. Great points. I have actually definitely considered the bro split, as well as the idea of doing whatever I want. And like you alluded to, my main hang up is that literally just in the beginning of 2022, I started putting my training on my Paragon training app with my company. And now there's like 35 people that follow my program with me on top of the other like 9 programs that we have offered there. And so there's like a part of me that doesn't feel right with these people that are now like following my journey and doing my programming with me with the pursuit of optimization, to just be like, hey, none of it matters. Like, we're just going to start doing whatever I feel like throwing on the piece of paper type thing, you know? But like a bro split, I haven't done that since before CrossFit. So the last bro split I did was 2009 in 24-hour fitness. I was doing basically the same bro split for 5 years. Never changed, just the same thing every time. And so that I enjoyed that. I like the idea of going in, just hammering a muscle group and then not having to think about it again for a week, and understanding that I now know that potentially that's not optimal, but would it even change anything? I don't exactly know. Regarding the idea of just kind of going into the gym and doing like whatever I feel like with no structure, I do really poorly with that, much like you, Dave. Like I couldn't imagine going in and not having some sort of plan of what I'm going to train. Like, even if it's, hey, today is a lower body quad focus day, or it's an upper body lat focus day or something like that, just to have some direction.
Yeah.
And then also, I think that if I were to do this, as I thought more deeply about it, I think I would need at least I would probably need 1 movement each day that was like a trackable metric, that I would at least go in with a purpose. So it's like, okay, it's my quad dominant leg day. We're going to start with pendulum squat. And so that's like the 1 movement I record, and I'll do 2 work sets. And then after that, I can go do whatever I want and like not really think about it too much, because at least I have this like North Star of, hey, as long as the pendulum is not decreasing, then I'm kind of doing things right. And then so each muscle group or each day would have to have some sort of just trackable movement that I know and gives me purpose. And so that would be one interesting way of approaching it. The other thing I kind of like about the do whatever I want approach, and maybe my main interest in it, is the auto regulation of RIR. And so like you said, it's really tough to go in and know that on a given day that, hey, I have to match these reps, and then I have to do a rest pause set where I have to match the reps that I got the last week. And it can become like just a psychologically daunting experience going into the gym. And so imagine if, you have 2 sets of 1 RIR or 0 RIR on there, and you're just like, you know what, today, I just don't want to push it that hard. So I'm going to go 3 to 4 RIR, but I'm going to do 3 to 4 sets or something along those lines. And so that just fits into the general like overarching concept of auto regulation, but it doesn't fit into this neat package that I create for my progression plan of like each week it has to get a little harder and we have to add a rep or add a partial or create a victory of some sort, So yeah, those are kind of the issues that I'm tangling with.
I have a response, but any initial thoughts, Aaron, on the concept?
Yeah, so I think this one it's one of those ones where it's really interesting where our like personal characteristics and individualities is really what I was looking for come into play, because for me, I do a little bit of it. For example, like I hate the bro split. When I realized that, like when that research started coming around that like higher frequency was better and stuff, I was like, oh man, this is fantastic. Like I have to really try hard to make every training program not push pull legs because I like it so much.
Yeah.
So like, let's say I hire, when I hire a coach, if they're like, all right, Aaron, here we go, like Monday chest day, I'm gonna immediately write back and be like, yeah, I'm not fucking doing that. Like I need at least 2 body parts per training session, but not full body. Somewhere between like more than a bro split, less than full body, like that is what I will do. And then within there, I will follow different things. I don't like the kind of auto regulation thing for me personally. And a big part of that is just preventing me from myself. So like Aaron at his computer writing programs with like my databases that I have built up to like carefully put things together or intelligently put things together is a lot different than like Aaron in the gym brain. Because if I didn't, I would literally push like probably take leg press to like 1 RIR and then just go do a bunch of drop sets on the leg extension. And that is what every leg workout would turn into if I didn't have a plan. And then for me personally, and I think this is something that I have used to help me leverage, like we're all entrepreneurs here. The training, pushing myself in training, like psychologically helps me keep that sword sharp for what I need in the entrepreneurial and mental side of things. So like really, really challenging myself there. And that is a big portion of it, is just like really keeping myself psychologically challenged and pushing myself really, really hard to like get momentum and be like, okay, Aaron, we did this in the gym. Now we're going to go home and put this into the computer with like, Straker Nutrition Co. stuff. If I didn't have that, I don't think I would be nearly as, successful and motivated with the work part of my life that I pick up, like momentum with from the gym. So that's why I don't do a lot of that auto regulation. Really is just to save me from my poor habits that I would have without them.
Right. Yeah, it's funny, Bryan, when you said how you'd at least have to have some structure, and without even realizing it, it's like I'm such a structured person that, yeah, when I'm talking about an unstructured routine, it's like one of my days and it's still following basically the same template. Like if you look at my, I'm just going to do whatever I want today workout 2 weeks ago, like most people would say, this is the same thing. Like you just, you moved the order up a little bit and you did a slightly different variation, but it's basically the same. But even when I go on vacations, it's like, okay, this is an upper day or a lower day. For the most part, I do a lot of upper lower, and you had these key movements and you still started with your compounds and then you went to your isolations, right? It's not like, oh, well, I went in and I did a cable tricep extension and then I did a hack squat and then I changed it. Like it's not just all over the place, right? But something about it. So again, I would not advise this for somebody who's looking to maximize progress. I do think there's a lot of utility in the same stuff week to week and making sure you can track progress. And like Bryan was saying, having a core movement there. But for me, it's almost like, how can I find enjoyment out of it? And part of it is even how my week is broken up. Like on Saturday and Sunday, like after this podcast, I'm going to have a shake. I'm going to go to the gym. The timing is good. I'm refreshed. My midweek workouts, I work very hard during the week at my job. And so when I come home to then have to, beat the logbook and be drained, it's just different. Like just working out at night versus the morning. For me, I'm a morning person. So there's just more to it. So even that could be a factor to it. And that ties in with what Aaron was saying about how is the rest of your life structured could play into your workouts as well.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine working out after like 1 p.m. Like if 1 p.m. hits and I haven't worked out yet, it's just not happening that day.
Last night I had another podcast and I like I said, I got blood work and stuff in the morning. So it was a big day away. And I told myself after this podcast, I'm going to go to the gym. The podcast ended at 7. And I'm like, I have a 30-minute drive to the gym. I have a 30-minute drive home and I have bare minimum, like 55 minutes at the gym. So I'm like, yeah, I'm not fucking doing that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I actually kind of joke about this, but one of the it sounds really silly, but one of the probably one of my most favorite things around when I, left my whatever corporate job, previous role and entered entrepreneurship full time is like, I can go to the gym in the middle of the day now, like I don't have to wait till 5 when all the other people, from their 9 to 5 are getting there and it's crowded and I'm mentally exhausted and pissed off from writing code and stuff all day. And then the like pandemic happened and stuff. And now so many people are working remote. Like there's a bunch of people in there during the middle of the day.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
this is bullshit. Like I sacrificed so much to come to the gym in the middle of the day when no one else is here. And now everyone else is here in the middle of the day.
I don't know if I said this to you, Brian, but I've said this to a few other people so I used to work 5 days a week. Now I work 4 days a week. And so I have Fridays off, and I will never go back. Seriously. It's just, and to be clear, I'm working all the time, but to me, work meaning, and we talked about this a little bit too, Brian, but like what that means, because if you're a YouTuber, you're, 40 hours per week of work is very different than if you're like a construction worker, right? There's different levels of work. So when I say I work 4 days a week, I mean, I'm seeing patients clinically 4 days a week, and it's very draining. And so Fridays, I would go to the gym, and as you said, Aaron, post pandemic, I see so many people on the road and at the gym, and I'm like, shouldn't you be working? Like, but obviously, very hypocritical. But yeah, it's so eventually I will cut down to 3 days a week, and then I'll get that advantage back over everybody else.
Yeah, totally. We went to do a photo shoot a couple of days ago in Newport Beach for my company, and we scheduled it for like 9 a.m. on a Thursday. And I was just expecting the gym to be completely empty, and it was packed.
Yeah,
like mostly housewives, but like I mean the gym was packed. You had to really just scramble to find any area to photo shoot. So it was very surprising to me along the same lines.
Yeah. So other than I know you're doing the arm experiment, do you see yourself going to this either borough split or just kind of what you want anytime in the near future, or is it just going to be kind of a thought?
It's a good question. I don't know. I would say that if it weren't for the fact that I put this program out to the masses on my app, that I probably would have already began to experiment with it. But I do have this like sense of obligation to the people following my program to continue to put out to them what I believe is optimal for the way that I would want to train. But I do, so along the lines of this more like auto-regulated training, we've talked before about minimalist training.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do see myself at some point jumping into like a 4 to 6 week cycle as a minimum of like 3 times a week, something along those lines, and calling it, a strength cycle where, we drop reps, we do mostly compound movements and stuff like that. And so I think that has like a piece of this kind of do whatever you want approach, because it's very different. It prioritizes recovery over volume and a couple other things. So it wouldn't be like a perfect representation of that, but I think that would be the first progression I would take into doing things a bit differently. Would do this like 4 to 6 week lower volume compound movement focus type thing, and then seeing what the response is from that, from the people that are following my program, and then kind of using that knowledge to potentially change things from there.
Well, Aaron, I know you said that you're only recently incorporating training into your coaching, right? Because your background is largely nutrition. So I guess you don't have that same demand on you. You can kind of do what you want training wise, and obviously even if you weren't training people, you could still do what you want. Are your goals mostly, you mentioned kind of going back up in weight, is it just find a routine I like and just try to get those little wins here and there? Or do you have like concrete goals you're looking for?
Right now, I'm actually, like I said, my program is following Brian's proposed progression. I'm marrying that with some of the principles that I've picked up from Chris Beardsley's hypertrophy book. So I'm training basically everything in the 7 to 9 rep range, trying to get stronger, lower volume, much closer, and pretty much everything's like 0 or 1 IR. Besides, like I'm doing like barbell, like an RDL. I learned the hard way last year, pushing that to 0 RIR. So I'm not doing that anymore. And that I'm excited to just like get stronger again, but in like higher rep ranges, but not, like 12s and 15s and stuff. So that's keeping me like mentally engaged enough. And then I want to put on a little bit more weight, to reclaim some lost, lean body mass throughout dieting. But I've kind of accepted personally that I won't really be able to gauge progress for myself until I reach that like 10% body fat and can see, okay, 2 years ago at 191 pounds, I looked like this. And that's part of the great reason of taking progress photos all the time is you have very comparable things getting DEXAs, although with my lifestyle, I'm not able to go back to the same DEXA place. And I've just kind of accepted that. And like full transparency, like this past year, I did not. And I said I had a bad off season. And then when I got lean, when I was 191 pounds again, I did not look like I looked the year before. So I was like, oh, well, the sad part or kind of a little bit unmotivating part is you spend an entire year hoping to like, okay, this whole package is coming together now. What did we do? I'm like, oh shit, we fucked it up. So
yeah,
there was always next year.
yeah.
But I mean, for me, it's everything to me. You know, I was someone who made my passions and hobbies my career and business and stuff. So for me, it's like me doing these things. I'm testing things out that we may incorporate for clients, and how much can I learn? How good can I be? And really kind of what I said earlier, like, I just really enjoy this, you know, and I'm always still just like hopeful that maybe I will learn something new, or, you know, maybe this is it. Oftentimes it is not, and it's not slightly disappointing, but I'm still like kind of starry-eyed enough to be like, well, next year, maybe there's this new thing that's going to help. So I think that is a large driver, but also to the point where like, you know, Bryan, you turned 40, right? That was a couple months ago.
Yep.
You know, I'm 34 now. I really want to know, like, how long can I hold on to this? You know, I'm in much better shape at 34 than I was at 21, 22, 23. And a lot of people talk around like, you know, that's when it peaks and then everything's downhill after that. And I'm like, it's not what I found to be true. It's not what Bryan's found to be true. And, you know, part of my goals now are like, I want to look like Bryan when I'm 40, you know, and I'm sure Bryan wants to look like he does now when he's 45. And I'm like, how long can I hold on to that? Or, you know, even if it is a 1% progress every year, like, I'm just stoked to be playing the game still.
Yeah. No, those are great points, man. I think the general idea of these experimentation things, Dave, are going to be a staple of my training, at least for the next decade or whatever, while I'm still, you know, reasonably healthy and young. And so like, just little things too, like for the first time ever, I took RDLs out of my program 4 or 5 weeks ago. I haven't done a single RDL in, you know, since I started this block. And that's an interesting experiment because I'm doing a whole bunch of, you know, hip extensions and leg curls, like tons and tons of leg curls. And so will I find progress when I put the RDL back in? Like maybe I just needed 6 months off of the RDL or 3 months off. And like, then it can come back and produce results for me again versus continuing to just bang the same drum all the time and expecting something different. So.
Yeah, it's so hard to tell in those situations about the progress because, and I think, like Bryan, you and I were talking about Peter Attia yesterday, and I'm halfway through his most recent podcast on happiness, and it talks about, you know, you can't expect to. We're saying hi. What's up, bud? Is that a costume? What am I looking at?
It was a dinosaur.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, he's a dragon for Halloween.
Okay, cool. So, you know, he's talking about, you know, you can't just progress forever, obviously. And whether it's comparing to other people or yourself, like that too has to stop. And you have to get this inherent enjoyment out of what you're doing. And that's obviously, I've talked so much on the podcast about progress and just in general in life. That is something that, excuse me, that's something that I have still to work on, you know, because you always want progress. And at some point, something just has to be enjoyable for the sake of it, which is mostly where I'm at with lifting, which again goes back to me just kind of doing what I want for a little bit of time. Because even if you have, obviously in your case, Aaron, where you can't even go to the same DEXA machine, so that the calibration could be totally different. But even with you, Bryan, to go to the same, I mean, like if I think of, okay, I'll take x-rays on a patient, it's like, here's year 1, year 2, year 3. And sometimes it's like, well, year 1, okay, maybe this is spread a little bit. Year 2 looks worse, but actually in year 3, because there's angle and there's shadowing, and there's so many different things that you don't have an exact gauge on that, right? And if you go from, what do you say, 12.2 pounds of muscle to maybe you lost, you know, 0.05 or something pounds, and it was really, now it's 12.15. Well, because of an error, it's showing 12.25. And you can conclude, well, maybe my arms grew from not training them. It's like, well, you can't really conclude that. It's just a margin of error. So that makes it very tough. The pictures make it tough. And even these experiments that we're doing, if we go with the assumption that at some point progress mostly halts, then really the experiments don't tell us that much. And I've talked many times about how really I think that all these methods just get you to the end goal at different rates, right? And so really the experiments would be much more valid on a large group of intermediates, right? So if we took intermediates who are 3 years in, okay, you guys don't train your left arm and you guys do, and see how that works. But obviously we're not going to get a lot of people on board for that. So I'm not saying not to experiment. I'm just saying it does make it hard. And at the end of the day, it's more just a, hey, here's a little thing I'm doing, but it has to come down to, I've made this my lifestyle. I enjoy it. It's part of who I am. And, try to have it as a life passion.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing is going to change as you get 25 years into training or whatever, then the only way that you may see things change is by literally doing something extreme, like training only one limb and not the other. And maybe that still means that nothing changes, but at least it gives you like a better chance than just continuing to do what you've been doing.
Yeah. Which could get into some of those like specialization cycle ideas where you just stop training an entire muscle group or even entire sets of muscle groups. To see, you and I were talking about how, like in theory, if the recovery there matters, then the way to get the fastest upper body growth would be to literally stop training your lower body, which I can't say I'd ever advocate. But you wonder about some of these like Olympic or the like the paralyzed, what is it, the Special Olympics and stuff like that, paraplegics and whatnot. And so, some of them have extremely impressive upper bodies. Just to be clear, I don't think that people should not train entire half of their body for the other side of it. But maybe that's the only way you could get any more capped delts at this point, is if you just stopped training a huge amount so you could put so much recovery towards it. I don't know. I still personally think it wouldn't work that way, but maybe you try something extreme and see.
Yeah, I mean, on one extreme example, we have Abel, who now is doing 67 sets a week for his back, and he's not training his quads at all.
Yeah, right.
So like, I mean, if something's gonna work, like maybe that'll work.
Good excuse not to train legs for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's all I've got for today, unless you guys have any other topics you wanted to circle back to.
There's one thing I wanted to say, but now I can't remember what it was.
Okay. So. All right, cool. All right, guys. Well, you guys have been going for a long time in the industry. Where can people find more of your stuff?
Yeah, we're at Eat, Train, Prosper is our podcast. We come out generally weekly with a variety of different episodes and topics and things like that. And then I'm at Bryan Boorstein on Instagram and evolvedtrainingsystems.com, paragontrainingmethods.com.
And then I'm most active on Instagram. That's at Aaron_Straker. And then you can find me at StrakerNutritionCo.com.
Awesome. Good stuff, guys.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.